All right, I'm at the mall here, Brentwood Mall. It's early in the morning, but they're doing some construction just over there, so you might hear some sound. I had some coffee from Soon. Soon, we want to see your classic cups return. Anyways, I hope the audio is good enough. I often hold the microphone. I don't like the look of it. I don't like the look of the fuzzy wuzzy either. Maybe I should just take this off because I'm indoor. And yeah, let's just start the video now. Click, click, click. Hello everyone, and welcome to Brentwood Mall. They call it the amazing Brentwood Mall. I don't like being forced to say amazing. I'm here to talk about the Leica Q and the, Q3 and the Q3 43. You could tell by that gray leatherette on the Q3 43. Let's talk about that first. I think it's all right. If Leica, the Q always came in the gray and then it came in all black, I think people would go nuts. Kind of like how black paint is rare, so it's worth more. I also think this gray leatherette is fine. I wish it was a different color. I mean, it makes sense not to use green because that's specifically either like Safari or Report Edition, but yeah, but besides that, I could not tell the difference between the two. I put a soft shutter release here from Retrophoto Reading just so I know the difference, or I would put different straps so I could tell the difference, but I think there's a slight weight difference. I didn't look at any of the specs or the numbers between the two. This is just a really quick shooting review. And so 43 mil. Some might wonder, well, where did that number 43 come from? Well, if you add 35 and 50 millimeters, so you get 85, and then you divide by 2, you get 42.5, which is basically 43 millimeter. So this lens is basically halfway between a 35 and a 50 mil, and I'm used to this focal length because I have the 40M roll core for M mount, and so I love shooting with that lens. I took it with me the last time I was in Germany, no, last year COP, when Brian Ruffin, I convinced him to buy one for my friends over at Photo Presto in Munich. But I love that 40mm M core. And as well, I grew up shooting with Minolta, and the kit lens that came with that camera was a 45 f2. So I'm used to shooting 40, used to shooting 45. This kind of splits the difference. So I'm used to the focal length. Now, if you are not, it's basically with M mount, when I have a 35, 40 gives you like an extra couple feet closer. So when they say, you know, if you don't like your photo, you're not close enough, that's kind of what 40 is if you're a 35 shooter. You punch in just a little bit closer, and that's great. And if you're a 50 mil shooter and you find that, oh, I'm always kind of stepping back a little bit because I can't seem to get my framing, well then a 43 is basically like a 50, but you don't need to take a couple steps back. But it is kind of a niche camera. I know a lot of people aren't 28 shooters. I am a 28 shooter, so I've loved all the Qs. I've been spoiled, just like the GRs, the Ricoh, and that's kind of what made me fall in love with the 28, going way back to the film era. 1998, got my first Ricoh GR1 film point shoot, and I loved 28. I fell in love with that focal length. So to me, I'm spoiled by cameras like the Q series as well as the GR series. But for a lot of people, they find it's too wide. And for point and shoot, I think wide is better. Most point and shoots were either 35 or 28. Some were in the 40 mil, like the Leica Mini Lux Contax T2. I think those were 40 mil, but 35 was common. The ones that I love, like the Nikon 28 Ti, the Minolta TC1, and the Ricoh GR, all 28 millimeters. And so I prefer the 28. When I was out and about shooting, I always felt that this felt too punched in. It was too tight of a crop, and I always had to go backwards. But again, that's me. I'm used to 28. For you, you're very used to 50, or if you're used to 35, again, 35, you're punched in a little bit more, which might end up making your photos better. And if you're a 50 shooter, then you have a bit more breathing room, and with 60 megapixels, you have enough pixels to just basically crop in. I think maybe the first crop in is 50 mil, and so I think you'll love the Q3 43. What I liked shooting the Q3 43 was product photography. I was in a cafe with Cafe YVR. Actually, him and I met up yesterday, and that's where I did the bulk of my photography. And actually, I didn't even end up bringing the Q3. I ended up bringing the M11P with the Light Lens Lab 28mm 9 element. And again, because I'm a 28 shooter, I typically I just felt more comfortable shooting with 28. Even doing kind of street portraiture, I preferred 28 versus 43. I'm sure most will prefer 43. I did some close-ups of Cafe YVR, so you can take a look at the photos that I took of him using the Q3 43 and then using the M11P with the 28. And then for street photography, for me, I prefer the 28. I like more atmospheric shots. I don't care about shallow depth of field. But I think for a lot of street photographers who are Leica street photographers, you probably like a 35 or 50. Yeah, I think if you either 35 or 50 shooter, you're gonna love the Q3 43. But what I notice is for product photography, I know a lot of people, a lot of like watch people, love using the Q to do watch photographies. So I tried that at the cafe and it looks nice. You get just enough shallow depth of field, not like so shallow that you need to like stop down, but you do know that when you go into macro mode, which on all the Qs, macro is awesome, right? When you flip into macro mode. This looks cool, but I've never really manually focused a Q. I've always just let the autofocus do its job. So when you go into macro mode on either Q3 or Q343, it actually jumps to f2.8, which makes sense because the depth of field is way too shallow at f2 on the Q343 or at f1.7 on the standard Q3. But if you do product lifestyle type photography, then again, maybe the Q343 will be a better choice between these two cameras. The big optical difference, other than the focal length, for me at least, it is the Apple Chromatic technology. And so I think that's the biggest reason why there's a $600 price difference. It's not just the focal length. Some people might think, oh, well, Leica is just giving you the extra tax on this because it's newer and fancier. But no, if you look at a 35 Summicron M mount, and actually either 35 Summicron or 35 Summicron Apo, we're talking thousands of dollars price difference between those two, either an L mount or M mount. And so it makes sense because there's no Q343 non-Apo and Apo, it's hard to say, but I think the biggest reason why there's such a huge price difference is the Apple Chromatic technology. So if you are all about like just optically perfect, because I have the 35 Apo, both in L mount and M mount, and they're just crazy lenses and on 60 megapixels. It's amazing the kind of resolution you get. A lot of Leica shooters though love character. Not that this lens doesn't have its own character, but it's not characteristic. You mean like there isn't a glaring character to this lens, it's just optically great. Same as the 28 Summilux here, it's also has like over 3 generations, it has this certain look, but it's no comparison to my 28 Summicron M mount. On my M mount lenses, it has vignetting and it has some fringing issues, but it has this look that I like and it's characteristic of my photography. And so if you want something that's just like optically almost perfect, and the fact that this is a built-in lens, so there's almost no gap. A lot of people don't realize that. Okay, so see that little line there? Most cameras will have a little line showing you where the actual sensor plane is. So the sensor is actually back here. So the last rear element is probably around here. My guess is there's probably half a centimeter distance between the rear element and the sensor. It's really close. So there's less air between the sensor and the rear element. And because of that, the image, like all things being equal, if this was a interchangeable lens mount camera versus an integrated lens, you're gonna get better image quality out of this because it's so close. There's very little air that the lens is having, and that goes the same with the 28 on the regular Q3. I remember with the Q2 monochrome versus the M10 monochrome with the 28 Summilux on there, and someone at Leica did the test, and he basically says the Q2 monochrome, the image quality is actually better than an M mount. And so because it's integrated, you're gonna get amazing image quality on either of these cameras. And so I think this is I consider this kind of niche unless you are a 35 or 50 shooter, which I think a lot of you guys are, but also it allows you to have a certain, not just a field of view, but perspective, because your focal length oftentimes determines the distance to your subject. If you have the Q343, your images will look different, and people are like, oh, what lens is that? And that happens often with M mount shooters is when I shoot with my 40mm M Rokkor, people be like, what lens was that? They're confused because it kind of looks like a 35 or 50. It's really hard to tell, and that's why Brandon Ruffin likes the 40, because when I was shooting with it and showing him, he's like, this looks like King of Bokeh, but punched in a little bit. And I said, yeah, basically it is King of Bokeh punched in. And so if you're shooting with the Q3 4.3 and you're out and about shooting, people see your images, it'll just look a little bit different than everybody else out there. And so I think that's really the superpower of this camera here and the Armour Chromatic technology. And it's all in one, and it's also leaf shutter, so you can also flash sync in daylight with a reasonably lower powered flash and get some really great photography. So I look forward to seeing different creators. I know Stock Easy, Jason Roman, he bought one of these things, so I'm interested to see, you know, how he evolves his photography, because I don't think he's a 40 M Rokkor shooter, so even for him it's a focal length he's not used to, so he's going to start experimenting and playing and maybe discover some things that he wouldn't have discovered on his own by just cropping in a 35mm photo, right? And so yeah, super excited that Leica has 2 versions. I'd love to see a 3rd version and not going the more telephoto way. Wouldn't it be cool if there's a Q3 2.1, a 21mm, and there is a precedent for this, right? Because the Ricoh GR in the film era had a GR21, and that was a crazy, crazy wide angle film point and shoot, and there's some amazing photography because you had a light compact point and shoot that had a 21mm lens. And then since then, Ricoh in the digital era has always had a 21mm equivalent adapter for their GRs to get that wider field of view. So I think if there was a Q3 2.1 and then it had a crop of 24, 28, 35, and 50, to me that'd be almost the perfect camera. I would buy the Q3 2.1, but I don't think they would make it because that's like niche upon niche. But that is Take's wish. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you Leica USA for loaning this to me. I'd love to get a long-term loan on this at some point, but I'd have to return the M11P first. And so that is going back to Leica, and you'll see my M10R more often. If you have any questions, let me know. Till then, we'll talk to you soon, and happy shooting. Click, click, click.